All right. Good evening, everyone. Welcome. And thanks for joining us for round two. Thankfully, there was no hiccups in getting you guys all online this time. That was a little bit much, but this time everybody's here, everybody's ready, everybody's got their wines in front of them, their notes in front of them. You guys look far more prepared this week. And yeah, I mean, we threw you for a whirl last week, and I think threw ourselves for a whirl as well. So welcome and thank you for joining. And we are ready for round two of Marche Madness. And the real March Madness has actually started. Not that I don't know who of you guys are paying attention to that, but this is the real deal. This is the tournament to be a part of. People were asking before, you want to know which wine we're starting with. It's the Bianche di Matauro, the Vigna delle La Vigna delle Terrazze. We'll have two wines actually with the word terrazze in it. Terrazze in Italian literally just means terraces. So terraced vineyards in this case. And then the last wines we'll have tonight will be the Le Terrazze Conero, which also has some pretty incredible vineyard aspects to it. So as we went over last week, we'll go over it again just for anybody who's just joining or didn't get a chance to look at last week's. Let me pull this up for you. Here's a look at the bracket sheet, and everybody sort of kind of had some questions about how it all works and how we put this together. The bracket sheet is basically an outline just to be able to get to taste through all 12 of these wines. In normal times, we used to do this event at Bergamot Alley at our bar where we would plow through all 12 wines at once. So it was a lot easier to kind of compare and contrast all the wines and decide how to judge them against one another, or how to figure out which wines you liked the best. But the idea with this, which has been, I think, so far successful, is that we're trying 3 different wines a night. And instead of trying the same ones in the same brackets as we discussed last time, which on a tasting level might be a little bit easier, we wanted to make the tastings themselves, each tasting themselves, a little bit more dynamic. So it makes it a little bit more, puts the onus on you guys a little bit more to be a little bit more strict with your note taking, figure out what wines you like, how much you like them. So when you get to compare another one and put the winning wines in their appropriate places in the bracket, as you see there, until you get to the final wines, you're going to have to kind of judge that, posthumously after we've drank them through. But at the end of all these, when we drank them, take a look back at your notes, confer with the folks you're tasting with, and figure out what you think you might have liked best and what you think was a better wine. And then at the end, we'll take everybody's brackets and we'll come up with a winner after all that. So that is the idea. That is the format. And tonight we are doing what we call week 2, which is Scuttling Scampi. So we're doing 3 wines direct from the coastline of Marche. We're doing the first wine, the Claudio Morelli Vigna delle Terrazze Bianchello. The next wine will be the Mancini Roncaglia, the Albanella. And then the third wine will be a red, will be the Le Terrazze Sassi Neri Montepulciano. So is everybody all set with the wines in front of them? We'll take a look at the map, give you an idea where all these wines are. So this is the map that we looked at last week to give you an idea where the Marche region is, and this whole sort of what this tasting's all about, and why I'm in love with this region compared to so many other regions. There's so much incredible beauty and incredible wines throughout Italy, but the Marche region is, in my opinion, this overlooked gem of a place in Italy. It's the opposite coast of Tuscany. So if you look at, here's Tuscany, that's where most people go visit. They start in Florence and maybe in and out of Rome, and they stay on this side of the Apennine Mountains. But on the other side of the Apennine Mountains, you have the calf of the boot, which is the Marche region. And again, some of my favorite place for food, for the people, the cities, the views, a great place to go visit, and especially a really cool place to go try some wines. The 3 wines that we're trying tonight are the blue dots here. We'll start with this one here from Fano, which is the Bianchello. The one above that from Pesaro, the Roncaglia, the Mancini, and then this last one here, the Fattia Le Torazze, a little bit more of a famous winemaker in one of the more important small appellations of the Marche, which is Conero, which I'll show you some pictures of as we get there. But some pretty amazing views for all of these wines. And you know, I speak about it every time I talk about the Marche, is that the food in this area is, to me, kind of second to none in a lot of places of Italy. And I know that's a pretty major claim for Italian food. But you're dealing with a lot of fresh seafood that comes straight out of the Adriatic Sea. And they do some, you know, basically their version of sushi, like a crudo, that is absolutely to die for. And all the seafood in this area is just unbelievable. And the wines themselves are perfect with it, especially, well, all three of these wines will be, but obviously these first two white wines are just made for that fresh seafood right out of the Adriatic. All right. Let's get into wine number one, the Bianche Di Matauro. Really unique, compelling, interesting, very different style wine than what we would be used to. Maybe if you're a California white wine drinker, this is much more clean, much more mineral, much more textured in a very different way. You're not going to get, oak or big rich flavors out of it. It smells like, fresh sea air more than it does fruit in a way. It's a lighter grape variety that is has kind of an interesting past in the fact that it was kind of overlooked for a while, as so many Italian grape varieties have been. There's a bit of a story behind each one. This one definitely has a very good story. Let me get back to sharing screen. So Bianchello is a grape variety that kind of has only recently been given a little bit more attention than it used to. It's a native grape variety. Oops, sorry. It's a native grape variety that was mistaken for a long time for one of the Greco varieties. If you're familiar with Italian wines, Greco di Tufo, Greco Giaia, Grechetto, Grecanico, there's a lot of different things that were just named Greco, which means it came from Greece originally, but it's usually some of the ancient varieties there that have got that sort of nickname. And it was kind of referred to as one of the Greco varieties for a long time. And then it was mistaken for Trebbiano, which is grown rampantly up and down all of Italy. And there's lots of different versions of what Trebbiano is. But the most common one, the most easily grown, the volume grape for much of Italy. And unfortunately, you don't get very many good versions of Trebbiano Toscano, but it was mistaken for Trebbiano Toscano as well. But in this area, it actually turns out that although related to it, it's actually a very different grape variety altogether. And technically, the grape variety is called Biancame. If you look into the sort of genetics of it, and it's not actually called Bianchello at all, although locally they refer to it as Bianchello. And Bianche di Matauro. Matauro is the name of one of the most important rivers. If we look back at the map of the Marche, because that center divide of Italy is the Apennine Mountains, some very high mountain ranges. Basically, that entire Marche region is separated by four major rivers that go down from the Apennines into the Adriatic Sea. And the first one, as you come down from the north, is Matauro, a very important river that comes out of the mountains there. And so these vineyards and this grape variety is grown solely within that river valley on some pretty, terraced vineyards on a pretty steep incline on either side of the river. And it's a really amazing part, but again, a very underknown and under appreciated area of Marche, but it's starting to come together. So this very classy picture here, these guys look a little brooding, a little bit dark, a little bit very serious. I've met four of these people, and none of them are this serious at all. In fact, so Claudio Morelli is front and center there. He's the very interesting. He looks like the most interesting man in the world. If he had, well, maybe if he had a beard like mine, but he's a really very nice guy, very incredible guy, and again, a big part of why these grape varieties are surviving the way they are. And last week when we had the Villa Ligi, Stefano Tonelli, he's all the way on the left side, the young gentleman all the way to the left. He's also a Bianchello producer, and this is sort of the the consortium that has just recently formed to say, hey, this grape variety is important, and we're gonna, sort of treat it with the importance that it deserves, and it's kind of an up and coming thing. So these are the only growers of this grape variety. This is it. So you're talking about a very small, under heralded grape variety in this very small area, but the fact that it's getting sort of recognition, the fact that they've able to sort of come up with a consortium and say, hey, this is an important thing, is actually really a big step for the grape variety and for the wine region itself, and for these very small producers that have been working hard to preserve grape varieties like Aleatico, like we had last week, and the other grape variety here, which is Biancame or Bianchello. Bianchello actually has a another pretty funny history. That's a picture of the grape variety. Really interesting. It is a pretty prolific grape variety. It can grow in pretty high volumes, but it's more similar. Almost looks a lot like a Greco. Greco can be transparent like that and freckled. It gets little red freckles on it when it ripens. You can see that on the picture, that it actually pinks a little bit on the outside. Reminds me a little bit of Ribolla Jaya in that way, and the fact that it's a very transparent skin. You can see right through it. It's not a thick green skin. It's not very phenolic, so it allows for a nice clean texture. But historically, this grape was actually, and is there anything more Italian than this? I don't know, but Biancame is, I'll read this direct quote. It's historically famous for the Carthaginian troops of Asdrubal, who is Hannibal's much less clever cousin. Apparently, they got carried away with their libations when they were campaigning in Matauro, and ended up on the wrong end of a horrific defeat at the hands of the Romans in the Battle of Matauro. So honestly, this grape is famous for one thing: it being a grape that a hangover history that apparently turned the war and became a big stopping point in the advance of the Romans at that time. So pretty hilarious and very, very wonderfully Italian that would be part of the history books, that this one grape variety was this particular army's undoing. It's unfortunate we don't have, similar in the American Civil War. If you could just, point to one particular beer that, took out a whole battalion, it's pretty hilarious. But anyway, very, very classically Italian. And then those are a couple of photos, but this is my only photo as far as my travels there. This is a picture of the Matauro Valley. So you can see pretty steep vineyards, terracing and sloping. Obviously, these are not vineyards that you're doing with any sort of machine harvesting or any machine work. This is all hand work. It's steep rolling hills. You can see the Apennine Mountains in the background. And then as you go towards the sea, it kind of flattens out, but it's a pretty hilly and mountainous area. And again, right along the valley, along the river, is the most important area for this grape variety specifically. Any thoughts so far? Do we like the wine? Interested in it? Unique? Very, very clean. It's a very pretty light wine, but it's got some texture to it.
Do you know if this goes through full or partial mallow?
This wine actually goes through an interesting process for the grape variety. What they do, I mean, first of all, they're old vines. These vines were planted in the 70s. And what he does is he'll do a extended maceration under dry ice to keep no oxygen in the process, but and to keep it from fermenting by basically keeping it that cold. But he'll put it on dry ice and extract the flavor from the skins, and then press and do a slow, low fermentation in stainless steel. It does not go through mallow at all, and no oak, but it's aged on the lees for 6 months. So that's really that's the texture that you're getting there. But it's not mallow at all. In fact, I think mallow would really show some poor qualities on a lighter skin grape like this. Sometimes mallow can go a little bit like yogurty, and I think that's probably why he avoids it on this. But what he does for texture and for weight is does that extended skin contact without any oxidization. So you're not getting any sort of secondary notes, that you're still getting clean wine, but also lees contact. The dead yeast that's what lees is the dead yeast. you're getting a lot more of a kind of a richer kind of wide mouth feel than you would normally out of just kind of a clean, bright grape such as this.
So this is kind of an orange wine then? White
Well,
grape?
no. So
skins?
no, it's a very interesting question. It's not really an orange wine. Orange wine usually refers to, even though extended skin contact would be the first defining character of an orange wine. There's a couple of different things that then sort of is required to be considered orange. He does the skin contact pre-fermentation, and as I said, he keeps it cold with like a dry ice, which is a common thing actually in Marche. They do that with a number of verdicchios as well, and pecorinos. But by that, what it's doing is the grapes are kind of breaking down, but they're not yet fermenting because they're too cold. So you're not getting the really phenolic character. Orange wines are more, first of all, they're normally treated in an oxidative manner, but they're fermented just like a red wine, meaning they're going to macerate them hard on the skins and get that skin contact to be further than this. In this case, it's skin contact, but prior to fermentation, and they'll slow press them so they don't get too much phenolics. So phenolics are the tannins that come from the skins. And then the second thing that makes an orange wine, an orange wine specifically, of course, is the oxidative quality. And what he does is go through lots of steps to make sure that the wines or the grape juice is not oxidating or being exposed to oxygen like you would with red wine. With red wine, oxygen is your friend during fermentation. With white wine, they usually protect it from oxygen. In this case, what they do is a little bit of extended skin contact, protecting it from oxygen. That gives it a little bit more weight, but then when it comes time for fermentation, press it off the skins so that it doesn't get too phenolic and too grippy, and again, doesn't get exposed to any sort of oxygen. So I wouldn't call this an orange wine, even though it's an extended skin contact. It's an interesting methodology of extended skin contact.
Yeah, I think I misunderstood. When you say extended maceration, I assume extended maceration is post-fermentation. It's just a cold soak happening is what I would have said in a pre-fermentation.
That's correct.
Okay.
That's
so you
correct.
cold soak it for days and then press it and then ferment it.
Yes, exactly. So it's kept on the skins, but not macerated at that point. Correct.
Thank you.
Super tasty.
What's that?
Super tasty. Really enjoying it.
Yeah, it's fun, isn't it? I mean, again, so to me, you know, there's not a lot of primary fruit coming through on that wine. It's not like something that's showing, you know, immediately popping out of your glass as far as ripeness or anything like that. It's very, very clean on the nose. It's very, very mineral. Again, it's almost kind of reminds me of sort of like that cool sea air. But the fruit is sort of secondary on there, and it's just very, very crisp.
It's got some great with the big mouthfeel. It's really nice. There's some great acidity though, and great sort of like citrus. Like, we both wrote down sort of mineral, salt, and lemon twist in different forms.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's super tasty. With the spicy salumi, it totally changes it. It cuts right through the sort of lees kind of you know, I don't know, heaviness of the lees. It makes it much more acidic, and then flipped over to cheese, and it changed it right back to being like kind of like almost creamy. It was really interesting.
Yeah, that's the kind of that's the interesting sort of I don't know. It's kind of a wine of two faces in a way, because it does have the acidity, but it's not what you expect as like a searing white, you know, white with that acidity. It's not like a verdicchio that's high acid and going to cut all the way through that. It's much more textured, so it's going to you know, sort of play with food in a very, very different way. So with you know, the soft fats of like a seafood, this is perfect with stuff like that. And even with, you know, some spice characteristics, this is really, really a fantastic wine with things like that. But it's not built like, you know, the more bright, high acid, searing white wines that you would expect from this area. It definitely has a very, very different texture, and a different mouthfeel. And again, it's ripe, but it's not in your face, you know, characters of fruit. It's definitely a little bit more of a lighter, briny salt air. Does have citrus, but it's almost like, you know, orange flower. It's got some prettiness to it, but it's not giving you a lot of, you know, very, very distinct fruit notes. But that's why I love it. It's kind of a sneaker for me. It's a grape variety that I'm really fascinated with, where these winemakers take the grape. And this has always been a producer that I've been a fan of, but this particular vintage, I think, is one of the better ones that I've had from him.
Yeah, we actually had this wine, but not this wine, what was, I guess, 2 years ago in the Marche, and it was definitely, it was delicious, and it was, of course, on the Adriatic Sea at one of those little fish shacks, so it was even better for the atmosphere. But this is better. I mean, we enjoyed it, but this is better.
Did you visit him when you were there?
No,
Oh.
no. I don't know. Maybe we weren't smart enough to know we should, but no.
No, I mean, we're talking very, very tiny production. These guys are super small. I've not visited him yet out of all the marquee producers. I've not had the chance to go visit him. But, fair enough. If giving him a miss is not probably too big, but he does make some nice Aleatico. He makes some really good stuff, and he's been doing it for a while, and a good character for the area. But again, tiny production. We're lucky to be able to get the wines that we have, the amount of wines that we're able to get from him. He only does a few thousand cases a year. Yes.
Question. So when you're talking about, for those of us who are a little more newbie,
yes,
when you
we started getting technical there.
Oh, it's great. I mean, it's great to absorb all this. But when you talk about like wide mouth feel, are you talking like, does that, like, what do you think like constitutes that? Like, what makes that for white wines, like versus others?
That's a great question. It's with white wines, it's interesting because there are just sort of the very neutral, crisp, easy drinking white wines that go in and out one way, another, and they're just they're wonderful to taste. But this actually adds some more dimension. And when I talk about sort of mouthfeel, my favorite thing to refer to actually is one of the ways that I learned to sort of describe wines, especially white wines. I learned from a master sake sommelier that in Japan, when they talk about sakes, they talk about the mouthfeel in the form of shapes, which I really love that because I can kind of picture that, where we always talk about in the States, or mostly in the wine world, we always talk about the front palate, the mid palate, and then the finish, right? So we talk about like, what do you feel first? Where does it go from there? And then how does it finish up? Does it zip up? Is it high acid? Does it leave you with, lots of, firing your salivary glands? Is it, is it sharp? Is it tart? Is it fruity on the mid palate? And this one is interesting because it almost, especially with the nose, is you're going to immediately assume, I would assume on this nose that it's just going to be light. It's not a very effusive wine. It's not very, very aromatic. It's not showing you, tropical fruit or grassy or anything like that. It's showing you this kind of clean mountain air or this clean sea salt air. And I love that about it, because that's just kind of a clean, fresh nose. It's almost got a little like petrichor on the nose, right? Like, the smell of rain on hot pavement. But the palate is not just like clean, direct, and finishes right away. It actually like hits your palate and then just widens off and is very, very like almost fat and rich on the mid palate without being sweet. And then it just really delicately narrows out after that. So it's not angular in any way. And sometimes, white wines can be laser beam, or they can be like diamond shaped. And this one is just kind of, it spreads out and widens out. And it just kind of envelops your palate and just, sits for a while. The acidity's there, but it doesn't zip up and finish like a more high acid, tighter wine would. It doesn't drop off a cliff where, something easy like a cheap Pinot Grigio or something like that would do, or cheap Trebbiano. And it definitely doesn't have it doesn't leave you with like a fatness or a sweetness that like a Chardonnay would. So it leaves you with something a little bit different. It's a little bit more textural. The fruit's there, the floral nature is there, but it kind of just widens out and just kind of stays there like a wave. That's how I picture it.
Yeah. And like, so when you want to buy more wine that's like that, right? Like, what are the things you ask for? Because that's one of the things I love about just trying to find that balance, right? Like, it's hard to describe that when you're, trying to buy other wine similar to this. Like, how would you describe that to somebody? What are like things you look for?
Yeah, it depends. It's all going to depend on who you're talking to in the wine shop, but that is tough. That's always it. It's like, how do you translate what you're learning, and how do you translate a wine that you really like wherever you are, whether you're in a restaurant or something like that? How do you say, oh, I really like this wine? How do I then find wine similar to it? That's a tough one, because it does have a good amount of acidity. So you always want to kind of say you like Italian wines with higher acidity, but you don't like ones that are like ripping acidity. You like ones that are a little bit more kind of complex, more so than laser beams is usually how I would describe, like, the ones that are just high acid and ripper, or, this one doesn't have a lot of strong minerality to it. It's not coming from like volcanic soil, like a Fiano di Avellino or a Falangino or something like that. This is just a little bit more of that kind of Adriatic feel. So to me, I would ask for something that maybe has a coastal influence, or something with like, kind of a saltiness to it. I love the saltiness on this wine. And something that's complexity. You always want to ask for like complexity, but something that's, not oaked or anything like that. Something like stainless steel, like that's similar to this one, but a white wine with complexity to it is usually the best way you can get across to somebody. But it is hard. You're right. I mean, it's so hard to describe why this wine stands out, apart from other ones. And again, this is one of those wines like the Aleatico last week. You're not going to, just automatically finding this in any old shop. You're going to have to, find a specialty shop that brings this kind of stuff in, because this guy does not make a lot of wine. So I think at best, maybe he sells some in California and in New York. And I think that's it. So.
Yeah. I was just like, you attribute it to like, not like us, like I was just curious, like you said, like as that you attribute to like a soil, but it's like his fermentation method, then it sounds like.
Yeah, well, and that fermentation method's a little bit complex, but the one thing that you're feeling here, which if you do get to talk to somebody about like what you like about it, is that it has the lees contact. So lees contact, I'll describe again, is basically what they'll do is they'll put a general white wine fermentation where they get the grapes, they press it off the skins as quickly as possible, because they don't want the tastes and flavors from the skins, which can be what they call phenolics, which is what you get tannins from. So a red wine that has tannins that grips you and bites back, if you will, that comes from the skins. And traditionally, in most white wines, a lot of people don't want their white wines to be tannic. They want them to be clean. They want them to be refreshing. So first thing they do, they press off the skins. In this case, they leave them on the skins to really develop and give a little bit of texture and a little bit of complexity, but they don't kind of mash the skins in, what we were talking about before. They don't macerate it. They don't like, kind of mix it up like you would like a red wine. And then the next part of that is they age the wine on its lees, which again, with most traditional white wines, they'll ferment the wine, and then all the yeast that gets spent and converts the sugars to alcohol, which is what happens during fermentation, of course, in a basic way. When all of that happens, all of that yeast then dies and settles to the bottom of the tank. And most white wine producers get that off the tank as quickly as possible. They have different methods of filtering all that residual basically it's like a sediment, if you will, which is dead yeast, which is called lees. And they get that off there because they don't, again, you want a crystal clean, very crisp, very straightforward white wine, you get rid of that. But there is a very old method of leaving the white wine on its lees. And sometimes they do what's called batonnage, that means basically stirring the white wine. So that lees is actually adding a weight and a complexity to the wine. It's an alternate to, say, fermenting in oak, or going through malolactic fermentation, which is what we do in California and a lot of big Chardonnays and things like that. Is you put things through malolactic and you get things like buttery flavors and big, wide, exotic, flavors. And if you ferment them in oak, you're going to add that oak element, and that makes a Chardonnay super tropical. And there's so many ways to sort of manipulate that flavor and make it bigger and more grandiose. In this case, you're adding weight to the wine in a much more delicate way, and a little bit more of a natural process for the wine itself, without sort of manipulating how it's going to taste, but giving it some mouthfeel. Where this wine, without that 6 months of lees contact, might just be a lot more, focused, clean, and kind of evaporate and go away and just be a nice crisp white wine. With this one, that lees context gives it a little bit more of a complexity. Does that make sense?
Like Muscadet, yeah, like Muscadet.
Like Muscadet, that's exactly right. So that's one of the classic wines where they do that as a tradition, and that lees contact makes Muscadet, which Muscadet can be a very, far more cold climate, not dissimilar from this grape in the fact that it can kind of be really, really, transparent and could be really boring if just made in a very simple way. But that lees contact makes Muscadet far more interesting and a much better food wine, as we were just talking about. This is very similar to that way. That's a great comparison, actually.
So like the mallow, lees, and oak are like kind of the mouthfeeler things for whites.
Yes, and mallow affects different grape varieties differently, for sure. And mallow can be a funny one. A lot of times Mallow, for everybody else, malolactic fermentation is sort of a secondary form of fermentation that wines undergo, that a lot of times they can arrest mallow and stop it from happening because it changes the chemistry of the wine. Sometimes they'll let malolactic fermentation go about halfway and then stop it. And so there's a lot of things you can do with mallow. But yes, oak being the most manipulative way that you can manipulate a white wine for sure, whether you barrel ferment it, or, which is the most extreme, or age it in barrel. But in this case, it's all about just aging it on its own yeast and giving it its own kind of natural flavors and giving it its natural body, as opposed to trying to turn it into something that it's not.
Cool. That's awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, but that's actually really, I should have brought the Muscadet example up. You're absolutely right. That's the closest in similarity to this for sure. This is like Marche Muscadet. I love it. Any other questions, thoughts on this wine? Do we love our Marche Muscadet? It's my new nickname for it. That will never stop. All right.
Definitely love it over here. That's for sure.
So we're, yeah.
It works for the wine nerds. It can easily be overlooked as sort of a simple wine, and then you really get into it. You're like, oh yeah, this is textural and subtle, and I really love it.
Are you calling us nerds?
Yes.
Thank you.
I've said it to your face enough times. You shouldn't be surprised. All right, let's move on to the second white. So the second white, this is we thought Bianchello / Biancame and the gang of the 9 very serious looking winemakers was an anomaly. This is even more of an anomaly. The Mancini family is one of the cooler stories in Marche, in that they're mostly known for their Pinot Noir. So Pinot Noir in Marche actually has this one specific history on this property, in that we're going back to old, army forces, but Napoleon's troops actually came through and camped out in the northern part of Marche for a very strategic part of their conquest. And with Napoleon, these troops bring with them their own Pinot Noir cuttings and start growing Pinot Noir. So the history of this property is that the vines, the Pinot Noir vines that they have growing right along the Adriatic coast, are actually were originally planted by Napoleon's troops, which is just absolutely crazy. So as much as whenever I'm going through Italy and find something like a Pinot Noir or a Cabernet or something like that, I'm always like, this does not belong here. This is one example where this belongs here perfectly. It's been growing here really for a long time, and they make a really quite interesting and very unique, especially considering their Adriatic coastal terroir. They make a very unique Pinot Nero, and it's quite beautiful. But on top of all that, and we'll go quickly to their property here, because you will be impressed incredibly. Let's see, share screen. But when you get to their property, it's a pretty stunning sight. So there is their coastal vineyards right along the Adriatic, basically on the white sea cliffs of the Adriatic in the north there, and it's one of the most stunning properties you could ever imagine. So this vineyard right here is the Roncaglia. This is the Albanella vineyard. So this is besides their odd affiliation with Pinot Noir, the Albanella grape, they are basically a monopole, both in varietal and in appellation. This is the only producer of this grape, although now there are definitely people who have become hip to it and have started growing it. But for the last, up to 100 something years, this is the only family that has been propagating and holding on to this one unique grape variety called Albanella. As you would expect from anything Italian, there's all kinds of confusion of what the grape originally was. There's another grape variety in Sicily, a very prominently grown grape variety called Albanello, which is a kind of a blending grape, a high producing blending grape, completely unrelated. And You know, so there's this sort of anomaly of this grape variety in these vineyards right along the coastline, this gorgeous dramatic coastline that this one family has been sort of in charge with for a long time. Now, this wine, surprisingly, is not 100% Albanella, and I haven't really gotten a straight answer why he doesn't do 100% Albanella, but he uses, depending on the vintage, he uses between 20 and 25% Pinot Noir, that he vinifies as a white wine, like a Blanc de Noir sort of still, and he adds it to this wine. So if you ask him why he does that, he kind of says, well, it doesn't do anything to the wine, but you're it's kind of curious when you think about 20 to 25% is not an insignificant amount. So I'm not sure. I'm not sure anybody's tasted 100% version of Albanella, but it's an intense grape and a very different grape variety, obviously, than the Bianche that we just had. It got a lot more aromatics out of the glass. It's got a lot more kind of almost Riesling-like aromatics to it. It's got a lot more of that slightly petrol, slightly cheese rind kind of characters to it. A very, very expressive grape variety. So here's a couple more views of his vineyard. These are stock photos. I didn't take these photos, obviously. But there are his vineyards. Again, absolutely stunning, right along the coastline. This is definitely worth a visit because you know, you can go and visit him and have lunch literally right out on this bluff out here as the waves are coming in and view these vineyards, and they're absolutely, you know, drop dead gorgeous. And again, to be trying Pinot Noir in this extremely different Mediterranean climate, an extremely old vine Pinot Noir, by the way, you know, in this extremely different climate is incredible. And then a white wine like this, the minute you taste it, you're like, you can taste all of the seaweed and the salt air and all of the wonderful things from that surround and from the food from this area. And it's just, it makes sense, this wine.
So your notes happen to say Pinot Nero and the label says Pinot Noir. Is that
same? Yeah, Pinot Nero just means black. Noir means black in French. It's the same thing. Pinot Nero and Pinot Noir are the same grape variety. Just like in French, Pinot Bianco, in Italian would be Pinot Blanc. Or sorry, strike that, reverse it. And then same thing, Pinot Gris in French and Pinot Grigio in Italian, same thing. And then here's one last look of their coastline. So as we talked about their terroir and the calcareous soils, the white clay, this old, you know, sort of ancient sort of block of limestone that has made up this Adriatic coast. This is the northern Marche coast, and it's a pretty stunning coastline. Where, if you remember the pictures from last week from the Pecorino on the southern coast, very flat. Very, very, you know, not a lot of aspect to the area. Yeah. Not a lot of aspect, not a lot of, you know, change. The hillsides are big and dramatic, but from here, you're a lot closer to that sort of interruption of the Apennines, and you have this real big deposit of calcareous and white clay and you know, broken limestone. It's a really, really unique area. So these are the vineyards right up here, which is just, you know, an absolutely incredible place for vineyards. And this whole area here is a protected natural park. So everything within Mancini Vineyards happen to be the only winery within this protected natural park. There's very strict regulations on, you know, no use of pesticides or anything like that. So he's practicing organic as opposed to certified organic, but basically he's working organically because that's the rules, the government rules of what you're allowed to use within the park. So needless to say, this is a producer who has fallen into a absolutely incredible situation with what's been passed down to them as far as you know, the terroir, where the vineyards are located, and he has these unique grape varieties in this very unique situation for a bit of an outlier of a region in and of itself. But I love this wine because it is, not only does it have this, you know, obviously very unique story to it, but it's a pretty textured wine. It's a complex wine. Melissa, as we were talking about, this is a very complex white. You know, it's got a very different mouthfeel than the last one. This is straight stainless steel, no mallow, and just sort of the best expression. But again, the impartation of something like you know, Pinot Noir vinified as a white grape, you don't really know what this grape is, you know, on its own, but it is a very unique, and it's essentially, I can say with authority, it's a one of a kind wine and a one of a kind of grape variety, and it ages super well. This is 2018. This is the current vintage that's released, and this is young. I've had his wine over 5 years old. I think I've had a 6-year-old wine of his, and it's just getting started. So it has that sort of Riesling quality to it that it just actually keeps getting more and more interesting. The minerality gets more interesting. That sort of seaweedy, salty, cheese rindy thing starts to, like, you know, actually get a little bit more complex. And the fruit on this wine, there's plenty of it. It's you know, it's not gonna fall away anytime quickly. So it's a very unique wine in that way, and that it will drink very well for a very long time.
Kevin, it was actually sort of, I think are we muted? No, yeah, it was actually sort of fascinating because we both had a odd kind of like reminder moment. It reminded us a bit of champagne on the first sip.
Yeah.
And that's the Pinot Noir, basically.
Yeah.
It's
Well,
like,
there is this sort of, yeah, like to me, there's a little bit of like Alsace and yeah, almost like a champagne that's run out of bubbles kind of thing to it. That's
right. I mean, obviously flat champagne. It was a very, like, it was one of those weird memories. Like, this is a flavor I know, but it doesn't belong here. It was delicious, but also just surprising. So yeah.
But you wonder if that's the Pinot Noir really, or is that this Albanella grape? It's I don't really know what to accredit it to. I mean, it's hard to say, I suppose.
It'd be nice to taste an Albanella, but obviously not possible, so we can't really tell.
You know, again, I when I first met him, I asked him the same question, and then it's funny. I was just before this, you know, just like you guys are. You probably have your Ian D'Agata book right in front of you, nerds. I'll call you that again. But you know, I looked that up, and literally says in the very short paragraph, him talking about Albanella, you know, thanks to this producer, that we wouldn't know anything about it. But it says Ian's first question to him is, why do you add that? And he says, well, it doesn't really do much to change the wine. It's like, well, that can't be true. Of course it's got to change.
That's not an answer.
So why are you doing it? Why are you adding that? Are you not, you know, maybe it's just to up the production? Or is Pinot Noir, you know, vinified Blanc is literally just going up to a production? I'd be fascinated to learn, but it's definitely an anomaly, and who knows, this guy has nobody else to answer to as far as you know, the winemaking and what he's trying to create. But he makes a really stellar wine every year, and it's one to behold, and it's one to seek out for me. And I wish I would had the discipline to put it away and taste it again in 5 years, but I'm terrible at that. But maybe I'll try it again this time. But it's a compelling wine. Anybody else have any thoughts on this? Do you feel like it's obviously very different than the last wine? Do you like this wine better, less? Is it a little bit funky for you?
I think it's very delicious. I mean, I know you said Riesling. For me, it's almost like Grüner Veltliner married Albarino.
Yeah, sure. No, I could see that for sure. It does have an Albarino kind of quality to it, for sure. That saltiness, and it has that acidic profile. It has that really, really, you know, again, much different than the last wine. It closes up at the end. It fires up the salivary glands. It gives you that real focus, you know, arrow point at the finish, for sure. So that's actually a spot on. The only thing it's missing from that is that it doesn't give you that kind of tropical note that Albarino does. Even, I mean, again, similarly coastal and extreme sort of area, but Albarino always kind of gives you a little bit more of a tropical note, even though it's a cooler climate than something like this. But yeah, Albarino, that's a very similar finish for sure. Anybody else? Love? No?
Really good.
Unique, huh? I mean, it definitely has a unique profile for sure. And again, it kind of blows off that sort of cheese rindiness, that slight funkiness to it. It starts off that way as it warms up, and as it opens up, I think it definitely changes in a good way. Air is its friend, and I think there's nothing wrong with that with a wine like this, because it has a lot to say once it opens up, for sure.
I actually think it would pair stunningly with the cheese course, frankly. Like, it just with like stinky blue cheese from France or something, or Gorgonzola. That would get like salty, stinky blue cheese. Like, it'd be awesome.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean,
I'm hungry.
No, that would certainly go well. And again, you know, I go back to the food in the Marche and in this area where they're just pulling raw seafood out of the Adriatic, and you know, some of the best restaurants I know. Steve and Andrew, you experienced it. I don't remember. Did you go to Il Clandestino or no? or you weren't there that time of year?
We're muted. We did go. No, it was extraordinary.
Oh yeah. Oh, I mean, that's
so fun. We were there on like a really dark, stormy night. So it's a totally different experience. It was like going there in a monsoon. It was awesome.
Oh yeah, and after walking through that dark path, and yeah, absolutely. So I'll show you this in the pictures next. But so I mean, the food here again, I can't overstate it that these wines go so well with these incredible Adriatic foods. And that's the first time I actually had this wine was on the coast there. But the restaurant I was just referring to with Steve and Andrea, called Il Clandestino, the clandestine, is a restaurant that is it's basically this hidden shack on this incredible cliffside coastline that I was just showing you. That is by far the best seafood I've ever had in my entire life. He's as I said, a Michelin star chef, has very, very fancy restaurants in Milan and also in the coast in 2 different places in Marche. And then he has this one tiny little, basically like sushi shack that you go in there and anything you have is just going to absolutely be mind blowing. And you have a wine like this and you're like, what is going on? And it's, there's a big nod to sort of what grows together goes together, and a wine like this just pairs perfectly with stuff like that. In fact, we'll take that as a segue and go to this next picture here. We go back to this. So this next photo, so this is again up in the north of Fano, which is the coastal town there. You're just down from Emilia Romagna, which if you look to the north here, you can see how it just flattens out. To the west, if you look to the west, the mountains start building up, and then it becomes the Apennines, and it's very, very big. But in the northern area up here, and one way you can, if you're ever driving around Italy, one way you can figure out that you've hit Emilia Romagna is that it's basically the only flat place in all of Italy. You can come out of the Alps, you can come out of any different area, and you come to Emilia Romagna, and it's just dead flat. So as you get into the northern Marche, boom, all of a sudden it gets very, very mountainous. The Apennines, you have the city of Urbino, and you have some amazing stuff there. So as you go down the coastline, it's dramatic. It's a dramatic change. And then the next thing we come across is this, massive sort of outcrop of limestone, which is the sort of spit. Actually, let me go back to the map here.
There we go. Exactly.
Hold on. Here's the map. So Ancona is so sort of that's sort of the one point that sticks out further than the rest of than the Marche. That's sort of the real calf of the boot, and you can see this whole area here is a natural park, and this is Monte Conero. And so Monte Conero is this is the big sea cliffs that you were just seeing in that picture, and Monte Conero is an ancient volcano in this area. So you have volcanic rock, you have all this incredible calcareous soil, limestone, white clay, and this is what is the result of that. And some of the most beautiful beaches in Marche, which there aren't a lot of beach area in Marche, but this is clearly the one area that is worth visiting. And what's interesting here is that on this spit of limestone and calcareous and white clay, and right on the coast, in all of Marche, when you think of everywhere else in the world, you would think this would be the #1 place for the top white wines in the region. This is the one place, this is the one DOCG for Montepulciano, for red wines. So as we move into the next wine, this is the one terroir and the one area where Montepulciano is the most important grape, which is completely opposite of what any of the wine nerds in the room or any other wine nerds out there would think. You would think this is where you want to grow your white wines. And funny enough, this area is specifically grown to Montepulciano. So this was a picture I took just on the side of the road. That's how stunning this is and worth a visit. But just down from here, there's a quick picture. There's Il Clandestino. So that's the restaurant that we were just talking about. That's literally a shack right on the water, cliffs on either side, and a very unassuming location, and a very small restaurant where you go in there and you walk out with an experience like you've never had before in your life. So couldn't recommend that enough. But when you come up the hill from there, you get out of that sort of beachfront, and just south of there, here's the property of Fattorio Le Terrazze, Antonio Terni, and we'll move on to our red wine. For those of you who haven't poured it yet, you should have. I already have. So we'll go through the pictures real quick, and then I'll come back. This is Terni's property. This is in the southern part of the that coastal cliffside range. And then, you know, very, very old Cantini is one of the oldest producers that has been there. You know, his family's been one of the oldest producers in Conero for a long time, works solely with Montepulciano, or at least that's what he bottles. And then for a while, he did do some stuff with Cabernet as well. But his regular bottlings are Montepulciano, and just, you know, a really classic old property, an old house that is he's sort of a legend in the area. Come back. So again, an area that you would never expect to be a showcase for a red wine grape, as opposed to all the really incredible white wines of this region. But Montepulciano, it has a fascinating story in Marche. Montepulciano is a grape variety mostly known for and more highly propagated south of here in Abruzzo. It's a very successful grape variety down there, where they'll trellis these grapes, you know, 4 points overhead, meaning basically they'll take one vine, split it in 4 ways, and then overhead trellis them and grow the absolute living crap out of them. Montepulciano can be unfortunately overly prolific. So they make a lot of it. They make a lot of it as much as they can. They sell it as bulk wine. You know, in this area of Abruzzo, it's not uncommon to see you go by a winery and they have literal gas pumps where you go by and get your demijohn and they're gas pumping it, and just like, you know, very, very high volume red wine. But Montepulciano in Marche, as you would imagine, in very Italian form, the producers in the Conero region say, oh, well, our Montepulciano is an entirely different grape variety than their Montepulciano. They try and separate themselves in that way. As far as all the genetic research and all the sort of back education that people have done, it is the same grape variety. It's just grown on very, very different soil and grown in a very different way, and therefore you're getting a very, very different wine. So much more mineral driven and not fertile soils. These are soils that are high in minerality and not high in nutrients at all. So you're getting much more challenged grape varieties, or sorry, challenged grapevines, and deeper roots. You're getting lower yields naturally. You don't have to actually cut the yields here, and they've been sort of working with this grape variety in a very different way than what you're used to in Montepulciano di Abruzzo. So this is his Sassi Neri, which is black stones, literally translated, which stands out. So as I said, you have all that white calcareous clay soil, those big white cliffs, very, very, very unique. But on the south end of this, Monte Conero was, as I said, an ancient volcano. So in this specific vineyard, he's got big chunks of dark black obsidian rocks throughout his vineyard, and that's why he names it that. Is that you've got all this white soil, and then bam, dark black peppered rocks throughout the entire vineyard, and it makes this vineyard specifically unique. So he's been making this cru of a wine for many years. So this is he does a couple of different wines. He does a regular Rosso Conero. Now Rosso Conero has a larger map, if you will, on where they're allowed to designate something Rosso Conero. It can be outside the Conero National Park. If it's a Conero, which that's what this is a DOCG wine. DOCG, similar to like a Barolo or a Barbaresco or a Brunello di Montalcino, is kind of his reserve wine. His Rosso Conero, he still does 100% Montepulciano. The Sassineri is 100% Montepulciano, but it's matured in French oak barrels for 12 months. So he does a judicious use of oak. He's not using 100% new, which I think you can tell right away on this wine. It's not very oaky. It's not, overtaken by vanilla flavors. It's not overtaken by wood tannins. It's very subtly infused into what is a really well-balanced wine. But it's a wine that actually, shows a higher level of pedigree and a beautiful version of sort of a reserve wine. And he makes very little of this. I mean, we're talking, he makes at most, 15 to 1,600 cases of this wine every year. It's very, very small amounts. Thoughts on this wine? Enjoy it, polished, lives up to your expectations, maybe a little bit, over exceeds or a little bit too big for a wine. I mean, obviously the wines we tasted last week were entirely different. You had the Villa Ligi, you had the Lacrima de Moralba, very unique grape varieties. This is a little bit more straightforward, a little bit more of a dark red fruit wine, a little more classic, if you will.
No, you're fine. Go ahead. Quick. You need someone to talk to. Go ahead. Wait, raise your hand.
Nobody needs me to talk. You guys are so funny. David, do you have a question, Dave?
Yes.
I do not have a question. I think
you like this wine.
It's an excellent wine. I think it's really good. It's not overpowering but a very good Italian. So not the bold Toscana, but
yes.
I'm not a big Italian guy, but I'm learning. So thank you very much for teaching me, Kevin.
Yes, of course. No, that there's a big difference between this and the Tuscan wines. There's no question. Tuscan wines in general, Chiantis are a lot more of that kind of rustic, dusty and dirty. Sangiovese has, some grip and a lot more earth to it. Montepulciano as a grape variety can be a very big and juicy wine. And one of those, as we were talking about earlier, Bliss, like if you go to a wine shop and, you want something from this area, you'll find a lot of inexpensive Montepulciano di Abruzzo that can be super delicious because it's straightforward, it's juicy, you can't help but like it. It's fantastic that way, and they make a lot of it. But up here in this region, it's a softer, more elegant, a little bit more complex version of it. And to be said, when we're talking about Tuscany, Dave, is that the name Montepulciano. There's a region in Tuscany called Montepulciano, and there's a wine from there called Vino Nobile di Montepulciano, which is right next to Brunello di Montalcino. But this is entirely unrelated in that the grape variety Montepulciano grows on the east coast of Italy as opposed to the west. So there can be a lot of comparatives, but as far as like the bigger, harder hitting Tuscan wines, whether it's Chianti, which is a little bit more classic, or Brunellos that are obviously see a lot more new oak and are very flashy and are a lot more expensive than a wine like this. And then of course you have like super Tuscans, which are even more bigger and grandiose and in your face. A wine like this is actually a refreshing change in that it's a bigger grape variety, but it's got a lot of subtlety to it. It's a much more pretty and elegant and drinkable and unique version of a beautiful Italian wine.
Great description. And really good nose. So thank you.
Kevin, I got to jump in. I couldn't agree more. In tasting, it has all that beautiful, ripe, kind of forward fruit tones. But then as it finishes, the kind of the fine grained tannins and like a little grittiness, almost kind of like not carbonic, but stemmy thing kind of comes across your palate and gives it a little grip, and it matches with there's subtle acid in this wine for sure. But that little bit of maybe like whole cluster, whatever that is, kind of helps out, combines with the finish and takes away all that ripeness. So you get that forward fruit, but then the back end speaks of like those subtleties that you're talking about. It's really amazing. The other thing I noticed as well is that, right away pouring it, there's a lot of spice and other things. Like if you are a Benedictine or a Finette fan, this would be a really good wine for you.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely, that's one of the different, I agree. That's a differentiator for these Conero wines for me, is that it's not just the more subtle wines versus Abruzzo, but you do have this sort of spice box that opens up. And again, that's absolutely to do with the better soils, with the mineral driven soils. This is a mineral red wine as opposed to a fruit driven red wine. It makes a huge difference. Now, don't want to throw Abruzzo under the bus. There's some really cool areas and some great Montepulcianos Montepulcianos from down there that makes, you know, some very, very, you know, complex and unique wines. But this is as you saw from the pictures, this terroir is completely unique for a big red wine to be produced in, and it shows. It really shows from some of the great producers. And you have to understand, as I showed you on the map, this is a small national park. There are not a lot of Conero producers. I mean, even though this is one of the more famous wines from this region, is a Conero Montepulciano, there aren't a lot of them at all. So it's you know, this guy stands out as one of the most, you know, to me, one of the better producers of the wine. But it's still a very, very small appellation and a small swath of understanding of how the grape can taste, you know, under these circumstances and in this soil. So I agree. It's spice box. It's got a lot of sort of warm spices to it, baking spices, and it just really has some great secondary levels, you know, not just pepperiness, but like some really fun kind of peppery herbs, and again, a little bit of a saline quality to it. In this way, it's more of like black olive. You get that black olive composition to it, which is really, you know, important. That balances off big juicy fruit. So black olive gives you that saltiness, but it still remains that sort of dark sort of flavor composition. I really like how that stands out from this.
Hey, Kevin, I have a question. Do you guys have any characters drawn in the? Oh yeah, yeah. Let me. The shape of a Montepulciano. Of course, we have a Montepulciano grape. Hold on one second. I'll pull it up. For those of you, most of you were here last week, but if you're not familiar with Sarah and I's silly world, we do like to try and make grape education a fun thing. And because there's so many grape varieties in Italy, we try and teach people how to learn about grape varieties through sort of visual learning. So I will show you our artistic rendition of what Montepulciano tastes like, which I love this guy. This is actually one of my favorites, Melissa. I forgot to pull him up. Thank you for reminding me. Let me share screen. So Montepulciano, again, because it comes, you know, from two different, very distinct areas. There's my Montepulciano guy. And what we describe is that, you know, he's sort of a gentle giant that delivers delicious lip-smacking slice of baked blackberry pie. He loves the tart taste of black cherries and plums along his freshly picked herbs. He's got a sweet tooth for chocolate and a penchant for a few puffs on the old cigar. He's not afraid to get his hands dirty and stained because it is a very dark and pigmented grape variety. And he does this heavy lifting with large swatches of wine regions in the South by adding color and depth. So again, if you look at the picture, he's got a plum on his fingers. He's got black cherries and blueberry pies and herbs on his backpack, and smoking a cigar, because some of these Montepulcianos can get that real sort of tobacco and smoke, and then a chocolate bar in his pocket. And just that he's a big brawny sort of guy and sort of like a, you know, a workhorse is the point of this, is because you know, as I mentioned, they grow the heck out of this. It's a prolific grape variety, and so, you know, it's a pretty strong grape variety that can be used in a lot of different ways. So there's our Montepulciano guy. I love that guy. I want a T-shirt of him. It looks like Craig. It's hilarious. Everything that he loves: chocolate, cigars, and gardening. Craig, you need to work on your hair. Like, you have to stick it up a little bit better, and maybe work on the beard a little bit, I guess. So there's our Montepulciano guy. Thank you for letting me share that one. I love that guy. But you know, it is interesting with Montepulciano that it's what was I say? It's because it's grown so heavily, it's sort of one of those grapes that, you know, again, gets misconstrued in a lot of ways. In the southern regions, they also make a rosé out of it, a Ceresuolo di Abruzzo, which is a very dark rosé, and the world has changed to wanting the very pale, very salmon pink, you know,
profiled rosé, but there are some really great rosés made from this grape variety, and so there's a lot of versatility to it. It's just more, it's more commonly associated with being this sort of dark black fruited, easygoing wine. So I kind of wish that Conero had a little bit more recognition, and I would say it almost went through a time where it was almost there, but there are a few producers that just, there aren't that many that make these great wines. And it's not that the history is going away. There's definitely a few that there is a generational switch going. Again, when you're only talking about a handful in this area, maybe 20 producers of Conero Montepulciano, that you're talking about, these 20 something families, and a number of them are going through generational change. There's Marco Moroder, who's another very famous winemaker from this area. He's a young guy who's just now taking over from his family, and they have one of the oldest cellars in all of Conero. But changing that sort of old school style into sort of a little bit of a new approach is taking some time. And Conero is not the only place that Montepulciano grows in Marche. It grows very, very well down in southern Marche in the Offida area, and that's now become a DOCG. And there's some great Montepulciano down there, but again, there's different producers who do different things. The wildest producer, if you really want to get into the grape, is Oasi delle Angeli. So the Oasis of Angels is one of the most incredible Montepulcianos you'll ever have, which is a great wine called Kearney. And Kearney is ridiculously expensive, but well, for the area, ridiculously expensive. I shouldn't throw him under the bus there, because if it were Tuscany, I wouldn't say that it was expensive. But he makes some incredible, very extracted Montepulcianos from the southern coastline of Marche, where he goes 200% new oak. He has this vineyard that is absolutely something out of another world, where the spacing is super, super small. He decided to, I think this is what was passed on. This is how his family had passed it on. But his vineyards, the spacing is super, super short. The vines are about 1.5 feet tall, and each vine, puts off anywhere from like 4 to 6 clusters. So it's the most insane. It's a very different vineyard than what you expect out of anywhere else, and it is a very extracted and very deep and very intense version of Montepulciano. Just another expression of it, equally as fantastic. But the Marche has a lot of different expressions of this one grape, and the potential of it is kind of all over the place. And this wine's opening up quite a bit now, which is great. Okay, any other thoughts on Montepulciano, or questions about the grape variety or the producer?
I have a question about this wine. So
Yeah.
we opened the wines up at about 4:45 to 5 p.m. So I had a little bit of time open.
Yeah.
And I would still say that when I poured into the glass, it was kind of a tight, over-alcoholic mallow bomb, and then it's blossomed and changed and got what I expected. We've had this wine before. We know we like it, but still,
Sure.
like, I'm shocked. I kind of feel like it needed to be open like an entire day in advance. It feels it needs a lot of air. And your thoughts on that? Is that the grape? Is that just this bottle? I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
No, I think it's an obvious measure of it's a young wine for what it is. 2016 was a great year, a really, really banner year for reds in Marche, and it's one of those things that if you were going to have, this is current vintage for the reserve. If you were going to have a reserve of any other wine, it's young. It's just young for the wine. So some oxygen, even though it feels lighter than say a 2016 Brunello would or a Barolo, even though it has a more approachable mouthfeel right away. It is still tightly wound, and it definitely would still benefit from some air. So I opened it up probably an hour before you, and it's starting to get better for sure, and it's giving a little bit more of like a menthol quality to it, which I really love. Yeah, absolutely. It's going to do really well by tomorrow's dinner. It's going to taste fantastic. So there's no doubt this is a very well structured wine with that little bit of a framework of oak, but again, not an overly manipulated amount of oak. It's not a very, you know, big, strong oak bomb that isn't going to go away. The oak will dissipate, the fruit will showcase, and the minerality even further. But without question, a wine like this is young for what it is. It's meant to age further.
Nice, thank you. And you've got this, so this one's on its own this week, so it's paired next week, or at some point with two other wines. So we have to remember this one too, apparently.
That's exactly, you have to remember this one. So you've now done the, when we look at the brackets, we could go back to that, sure. Now that we're moving on, that's exciting. When we look at the brackets, we've done this whole corner here. We've done the Claudio Morelli, Bianchello, the Mancini Roncaglia Albanella, and the Madonna Bruna Pecorino. So now you have to remember from what you enjoyed last week, you know, which one you think is better. This isn't actually my vote. I'm not sure yet, but just so you understand. But this is how you would fill it out: is to decide between that lower left-hand corner, decide between which of those wines you like the best. So maybe if you decide, again, I don't know, I'm not going to say these are my picks yet. I'm not going to commit to that. But no, seriously, I'm not ready. I'm not ready to do that. Actually, I'm still learning as we go too. But you know, this is how we'd fill it out. So as of last week, we've learned, now we've got these all wines, and you kind of fill out the rest of your brackets. We decided between these two, which who knows which one you like there. Maybe I'll choose the Ligi, which is against my religion because I'm addicted to Luigi Giusti. But and then of course you just tried the Le Terrazze up here, which we will try the other two reds in the last week, I believe. Let me see. Yeah, we'll try those other two reds in the very last week of the tasting, alongside the Verdicchio. So I know it gets confusing, but again, the whole idea, instead of placing the three wines next to each other, which you know, maybe on a tasting level would be the most intuitive thing to do, the idea is, I love the idea that we're tasting two whites and one red, or two reds and one white per tasting. So we're mixing it up a little bit. But yeah, it does put the onus on you guys to take good notes and decide what wines you like after the fact. But hopefully at the end of this, you'll understand why I curated it this way, and we'll come up with some winners. But yeah, this is the first, you know, as second week is the first time we've gotten through one corner of the bracket. So that's super exciting. I look forward to hearing what you guys think. Do you want to share that actually while we're here? Does anybody want to share what they think, who they think goes through in that lower quadrant?
So you just showed us the cheat sheet, or the answer sheet, right? So I just was curious, in the lower right, is that Ligi, or is that misspelled Luigi?
Well, that's exactly right. I should have done that. No, there is no cheat sheet. Absolutely not. If anything, the cheat sheet, as I was saying earlier, Kevin, is that I sent this bracket to our dear friend Ian D'Agata, who is a master of all things Italian wine, and he's looking forward to filling out these brackets and sending his. I'll share it with you next week. So we'll see what the master says about these wines. I was very fortunate to taste with him exactly a year ago. Like, honestly, we both laugh about it was right before the country shut down. I was able to taste with him, and we tasted 20 Verdicchios in a day. And then the very next week, you know, San Francisco shut down. So every time I talk to him, I blame him for the shutdown. But anyway, so he's excited to impart his picks on there. We'll share them next week and see what Ian D'Agata has to say. But no, those I've decided those are not my picks. Those were just showing you how the bracket works. I'm not going to show you my picks yet.
Kevin.
Yeah.
As I was opening the bottle for tonight on this Sansonetti,
yeah,
I saw that it was a DOCG. Can you explain how a wine gets designated a DOCG?
Absolutely. That's a great question. I'm sorry we didn't go over that. So that can be, you know, as if Italian wine wasn't confusing enough, that can be one of the most confusing things with Italy. And for a long time, it was kind of set in stone where the DOCGs were what they were, but only in the last 8 years, actually, has that designation system opened wide up. So DOCG it is a, you know, for those of you looking at home, like it's that band right along the top of your wine that just says DOCG right there. It's that band on the top, which is issued by the Italian government. And it has obviously a serial code on it and a number on it on how many of these are allowed. And DOCG, to define it the best, it's a designation that says this grape grows the best in these particular specific boundaries in this soil under these conditions, and under these rules, if you will. So the DOCG rules for one wine is going to be different than something else. Some of the most famous DOCG wines would be things that all of you have heard of, something like Barolo or Barbaresco or Brunello di Montepulciano. Those are names of DOCGs. Now, of course, they're not the name of the grape variety. A Barolo and a Barbaresco is made from 100% Nebbiolo, just like Conero DOCG is made from 100% Montepulciano. But that just happens to be one of the many rules that come into play for Montepulciano or for Conero, is that it has to be 100% Montepulciano and it has to be grown within the national park of Monte Conero. You know, beyond that, the other DOCG rules is it has to be aged in some sort of wood. It doesn't have to be new barrels, but any sort of wood for up to 12 months and then another year in bottle before it's released. So the Conero DOCG rules are actually fairly lenient compared to something like Barolo. They have much stricter rules on something like Barolo, which can be quite controversial because you know, when it comes to Barolo, you have a lot of producers in a concentrated area and there's a lot of money on the line, right? Same thing with like Brunello. You've got a very small area for Brunello and a lot of producers, and they are talking about big money. And it's actually the consortium every year, the sort of government or the governmental body, if you will, that decides how much Brunello is allowed that year. So when you think about the yields, if it's a certain year and there's you know, maybe it's a very warm year and they're growing a certain quality of it, by before August they've decided how much of your wine you're allowed to classify as DOCG Brunello di Montepulciano. Now the group decides that, so you can imagine there's some pretty political heavy influences going on with that when it comes to Brunello and Barolo on, hey, you know what, I think I'm only going to be able to make this amount of good Brunello, but the smaller producers can really, you know, suffer from that, or they can benefit from it. I mean, it really depends on the year. So it's a designation by the government that tells you and helps the consumer, at least that's the ideal of it. It helps the consumer understand that you're buying a wine of a certain quality. And so in this case, you know that if it's DOCG Conero, you know that it's going to be 100% Montepulciano. You know that it's going to be grown in this certain region and on this very unique soils that we've been discussing this evening. You know that it's going to be barrel aged, so it's going to be sort of the reserve of the higher end of that house that you end up buying it from. There's certain things that you know. Same thing with a Barolo. You know when you're buying a Barolo and why the Barolo costs so much. You know, sort of the boundaries in which that Barolo exists. Now, as I said, about 8 years ago, 8 to 11 years ago is when things started really opening up. And in some cases, once again, I'll point to the confusion of the political nature of it. In some cases, it made things far more confusing as opposed to less confusing. The idea is to open up more DOCGs. It will make things a little bit more easy for the worldwide consumer to understand Italian wines, because Italian wines are completely the most confusing wines in the world because of the number of grape varieties. You're talking about over 380 grape varieties. You're talking about all these different appellations. You're talking about all these different areas. So how do you understand Italian wines? You can't. So the DOCG system, in a way, kind of helps people. Okay, now I can kind of guarantee that this wine that I'm buying, at least I can look it up and say, okay, I know what it is in general, and I know that I might like it, right? I know that I might like it because it's a Valpolicella Superiore. I know that I might like it because it's Chianti Classico DOCG. And so in a lot of ways, it does help that out. But here's an example where it became a little bit more of a clusterfuck, if you will. And that would be in Prosecco, right? We all knew what Prosecco was. We all had an expectation of what Prosecco is. It's a semi-sweet sparkling wine that I can buy for $10 on the shelf and bring to a house and be very happy with, and mix with orange juice, and everybody's happy except for the hangover you get the next day because of the sweetness. But Prosecco has all of a sudden gotten a lot more confusing, because the area of Prosecco, both in Friuli and the Veneto, is now classified DOCG. And until now, or until this point, they had always called Prosecco. Now, because they designated the region to be called Prosecco, meaning the geographical boundaries to be referred to as Prosecco, they renamed the grape variety Glera. So now all of a sudden people can make a Glera wine, a sparkling Glera wine, but maybe they weren't lucky enough, or maybe they weren't politically savvy enough to have their property inside the Prosecco area, and all of a sudden they can't call their wine Prosecco anymore. They have to call it sparkling Glera or sparkling wine from Veneto or anything like that. Absolute nightmare. So Glera wasn't really a term that was used ever before, but now you have this Glera grape that's grown all over the place, and only the people who had the political clout to get in there and make themselves part of the Prosecco DOCG are now, people who can call their wines Prosecco and market them as Prosecco, which you can imagine has a huge effect for some of these wines. On top of that, it's also a good reason for all these wonderful Prosecco producers and these very big landowners. It's also an opportunity for them to maybe raise the prices, because now their Prosecco, what used to be $10 a bottle, has a DOCG band on the top, and now it's a more important wine. So all of a sudden, my Prosecco is definitely worth $20 a bottle. So there's a lot of fallout from this explosion of change. It's all going to be, for the better in general, but and there's good Prosecco to be had, and they're starting to come up with crews within the Prosecco area where you can maybe find some more serious Proseccos. But at the end of the day, it's a very interesting change in the Italian world when it comes to these wines in how you designate it. But at the end of the day, DOCGs, it's a great question, Larry, is like, what does it mean, and how do you tell? For each DOCG, it's different rules. And at the end of the day, what it does is it tells you this is sort of the top wine of its class, meaning where it's grown, the soils it's grown in, the conditions in which it's been grown, and you can guarantee that the grape variety and certain aspects are true about the wine. Does that make sense? That was the long story short version of it. Of course, I was rambling on that, but it's not an easy thing to describe as you would imagine. Morgan, did you have a question? Your hand is up.
How does one win this bracket?
Aha. The elusive winning bracket. The winning bracket comes from basically you're taking an average mean of what everybody puts in as their bracket. So we're anticipating about 40 brackets entered, and actually more than that, about 45 brackets entered, and of those we will take a tally of. So if you think of the in the quadrant that we were just talking about, of those three wines, the first wine to advance between the two whites that we tried tonight, the Claudio Morelli and Albanella, if there's 30 votes for the Albanella and 20 for the Bianchello, they get a certain amount of points. So basically we're taking a mean of everybody's brackets, and whoever at the end of the day, you will end up with a perfect bracket. Someone will have a perfect bracket of basically the average of what all the brackets say, and that's how we determine the winner. And if there is a tiebreaker, it will be Ian's bracket.
But don't we all win just from drinking the wines? I mean, come on.
We all win. We're all winners here. It's so true.
Actually, no, I like winning. I'm with Morgan on this. I just want to point out that.
No, I was going to say, I know you well enough to know that you're competitive. So it's there's no doubt you're in it to win it for sure. But no, that's how we determine it every year. Again, somewhere between 45 and 50 brackets, you take the mean of what people like the best, and you average that out, and then apply points to every level of the brackets to see, you know, which wine wins the most points from the general consensus, and then you'll end up with an average that that tells you exactly you know, what the winner is. And so far, it's worked out great. So don't jinx me on this. If it gets messed up this year, I will blame you.
I will take full responsibility.
I'm sure you will.
On the championship award.
What's that?
Heavier weighted on the championship award.
Yeah, no, it's been really fun, because I tell you what, like, you know, we've done this for, I think this is the 7th year or 8th year that we've done this, and every year there is no way. I think maybe once, I'll say determinately, only once did I call the winner beforehand, for sure, because you just don't know how many people like the like this wine or that wine, and it's been really surprised. Like, there's sometimes where one wine just shows really well, and maybe, you know, through reactions and stuff I can tell, but you know, like, so far I can tell, you know, so far what you guys have liked a little bit, but at the end of the day, it's been every year I've been pretty surprised at the winner, which is very March Madness style. Dave, did you have a question? There you go.
No, I do not have a question.
You raised your hand.
I'm going for Gonzaga.
Aha, there you go. Exactly. That's a good one. Gonzaga or Xavier. Those are the two. Yeah, exactly. I'll go for Xavier then.
I'm going to vote for you because you are just adorable.
Oh, thanks, Mom. That's very sweet.
I'm
glad I'm the winner, but I'm the ref. I'm not allowed to win.
That's okay.
And the winner gets another round of this in their home. Means you get a free tasting with your friends with me, which, you know, lucky enough, I'm sure you're totally sick of me by this point, but
No.
this year we get to give away something fun, where usually we just give away wine. This year we get to do something fun because it's all remote, so it makes it more interesting.
Can we have a tasting with Christine instead? She's good.
What's that? Oh, with Mom? Yeah, absolutely.
So
Mom,
next tasting you have to come to Connecticut.
I forgot that it's, yeah, absolutely. Oh, that's fine. Yeah, next tasting I come there. No problem.
Okay.
You're in charge, Mom. You're the winning.
Yeah. Quick question. How much of the Claudio Morelli do you have left?
I think I have 8 bottles left, but I can get more.
Oh,
if you'd like.
Good answer. Very good answer.
I know. Well, see, now Pedro has tilted his. He's showed his cards. He's now showed us who wins, and all of a sudden, we know.
Alex and I bought some of this wine a while back, like after one of those first tastings, and I don't know if I ever went over to Alex's house to pick them up, but man, this wine blew us away at a Marche Madness several years ago, and it's not disappointing. Like when I pulled up the taste and I looked through and I saw that bottle, I was like, oh yeah, in my bracket, in my mind, I was like, oh yeah, that's kind of a sandbagger. It's going to the top for sure. Not to disposition anyone. It's just a freaking crazy good wine.
No, I agree. It's very, very good. It's, you know, it's funny. It's not everybody's favorite, but I think it's super unique, and it's always a dark horse for me coming into this tasting. I always love this. This wine. I always love this producer. Again, tiny producer, only makes, you know, a couple of thousand cases in total. So it's just a treat to be able to have this wine year after year. But this year specifically, I think it's showing the best I've ever had it.
Kevin, just to add one more thing, I think this year we should send a trophy, like, you know, the little plastic trophy to the winning winery. No explanation at all. Marche Madness 2021. Just in a box.
That's funny, because a few of the producers that I know have been aware of this ridiculous tasting that I do every year. Which, again, you know, if this was Tuscany or Brunello or you know, or Barolo or anything like that, you know, everybody, you know, it would be a little bit more, you know, common. But the Marche producers, when I tell them that I do this, they just think they're like, oh, they're so thrilled. They're like, oh, that's so great. But this is the year, because I think most of you saw my ridiculous social media campaign. this is the year where they actually like, saw my videos, like, what is that guy doing? Wait a minute, you're tasting Marche wines? Like they're so surprised that someone cares about a dozen wines enough to have a giant tasting based around them, where it's so fantastic. They're so humble. So this year, more than the rest, they're actually quite aware of it. There's been Villa Ligi has asked me like, how's it going? Are we winning? So it's really quite cool. This is definitely a different year because of the world of social media, is that they paid attention to my videos this year. They think I'm insane, of course, but at least they're paying attention to it.
I'll volunteer to help with the trophy, but it is your return address. So
yes, I like
warned.
it. I like it. I just wonder, do I have enough time to make a trophy likeness of myself? Like with the big beard and all that. Maybe that would be worthwhile. That's
it would be, but the answer is going to be you're probably going to have to go with the weird muscle man, the standard trophy.
Yeah,
we
that's
tried
okay.
the likeness of Steve, we failed. Yeah. This should not surprise you. So
it always came out as Godzilla, right?
What's that?
It always came out as Godzilla. That's all.
Yeah, every time.
Yeah, you're wrong.
Awesome. All right, you guys, that was amazing. Thank you so much. Does anybody else have any more questions before we wrap up? Anybody have any thoughts? I mean, we know that the Pedro crew has already put their votes in for this one. So we'll see who decides if I don't know. That's a tough one, Pedro, because Pecorino last week, that Pecorino was banging for a Pecorino. So if you're gonna put the Bianchello through, I'm impressed.
I agree. That Pecorino was like I said, it was like undervalued Chablis. It had the woolliness, it had the grippiness, broke Somme juice, kind of in that regard.
Yeah.
I have a little crush on this wine that I've had for quite some time. So
fair enough. And the Mancini's as dark a horse as can be. That's a pretty nerdy wine as well. So I like that bracket specifically because it's so unique. I mean, I hope that I curated all these brackets to be super unique wines in their own right. So it should be interesting to see what you all decide are your favorites to come through. That's always my favorite part at the end of this, is to see what you guys determine as the winners. So.
Well, I've got a couple of my heart set on a couple of these that are going to be the Molly Ringwald that shines through at the 16th moment for sure.
Awesome. Okay. Anybody else? Any other thoughts? Last minute questions or queries or quandaries?
Thank you. Good night, Kevin.
Thanks, everybody. Good night. We love you guys.
Yeah. When do we get to the Italy trip?
Oh man, the minute the Italy boundaries open up, we are going. Trust me, we can't wait for that Italy trip.
Yes, the winners. We'll do a tour of the winners over the years.
I like that.
I love it.
I got a guy. Yeah, we all got. I have guys in the Marche.
Night, Kevin.
Good night, guys. Good to see you.
I practically do need to.
See you next week, part 3.
Yay.